For more analysis on the President's expected address, I'm joined via Skype by Sanusha Naidu, political analyst from the Institute for Global Dialogue. Sanusha, welcome. Thanks for speaking to us as we wait for that address, that family meeting with President Ramaphosa. Government regulations versus public adherence. That's a big debate. We point fingers very easily at the government when they drop the ball, or even when they don't drop the ball, when we perceive them to be dropping the ball. But South Africans have not been upholding their end of the bargain. How should we be looking at ourselves?
Good evening, Anlie, and all the best for 2021, and good evening to the listeners. I think you've really touched on a very critical, if not significant, issue around how do we actually police ourselves. I mean, that's essentially what it is. How do we take responsibility? How do we actually adhere and also change our behavioral stance, our social attitudes to one another, and not always believe that it is the responsibility of somebody else to change our behavior. And I think that's going to be the big debate. What many of people are thinking about is whether we go into a harder lockdown. I don't think harder lockdowns actually change perceptions or change people's behavior. That has to be an inherent characteristic born out of your own belief. You have to show respect. You have to show kindness. By wearing the mask, you're actually saying, I respect you as my fellow human being in my society, in my community. By not wearing the mask, you're being disrespectful. And I think to a large extent, government can't change your mindset, nor can community leaders or religious leaders or any kind of socio-economic leadership change your mindset. It has to come from within. And the only way you can do that is if you sit back and you think. There is a group of people out there who have consciously or unconsciously decided that they will sacrifice, whether they make the conscious decision or unconscious decision to exit this world, but people are dying. It's no longer a question of, I know of somebody who has succumbed to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's now somebody very close to you. It's somebody within your family. It's somebody within your circle of life. And I think to a large extent, what we have to be thinking about much more strategically is a collective responsibility is a greater benefit to all in society than this individualistic approach that it's me, myself, and I.
The President, by the very nature of his job, has to make some difficult compromises. How will he be weighing up public sentiment and support for the ANC amid corruption, chaos, and all of that in a local election year?
Well, I think firstly, some of the tough decisions he has to make is whether or not he extends the ban on alcohol sales. I know that whatever he says tonight, there will be a section of the population, including the opposition parties, that will take issue with it. They'll whine and they'll gripe and they'll say this is not the way to go. But I think for a moment in time, we need to ask ourselves is if we were in that position of the president, how does he reconcile? How does he balance? So I think the question around extending the level 3 adjusted lockdown measures will be definitely something to look out for. What will this do to industries like the alcohol industry? We know what's happening in the restaurant and the service industry when it comes to the food and beverage. But of course, the question then becomes is how does he deal with the numbers? The numbers have been very erratic since the 28th of December when the last meeting was held, or the address to the nation was held, in introducing the lockdown 3 adjusted measures. And I think to a large extent, this is going to be key in terms of saying, how do we make sure people actually adhere? I know that the South African Medical Association, the representative that was on your show earlier, spoke about questions around reducing the number of gatherings for funerals, for any kind of activity in terms of public space, whether it's meeting friends or whatever. I think you've got to basically start thinking about reducing it from 50 and stop talking about hundreds in an outdoor venue and 50 in an indoor venue. There's just no questions of whether people are adhering to the rules. And then thirdly, I think there's going to be real important questions around having more visibility around the implementation and application of how you monitor whether adherence is being respected in terms of what's happening with regard to public transport. I think we've come to a point where we are not just in a peak. We are basically going to see many peaks from now until what some people are predicting in the kind of crystal ball gazing that this pandemic is going to be around till about the 4th of April, where we're going to continually see these numbers increase. I think the other question is, talking about the vaccine. That's going to be critical. The rollout for frontline workers, particularly in the health sector, and how that's going to be important in terms of who gets it. But I think it has to be something that he's going to implore on ordinary South Africans to start playing ball with regard to how they take responsibility. And I think we can no longer just say, oh, the president of the government is not doing enough for us. What are you doing for yourself?
Sanusha, you mentioned opposition parties, and that's very important on any night when the president speaks to us, because shortly after his address, we here on eNCA, as a rule, engage with opposition parties, with members from business communities, analysts like yourself, to get their reaction to the address. Do you think we have opposition parties that oppose for its own sake? Do you think that on any given night when we hear from the president, like you said, I'm going to quote you, all we hear is moaning and griping, but not for the right reasons and not with action as a direct consequence?
Anlie, I think that there will be criticism. And what I would like to see is constructive criticism. I think that in a way, sometimes when you think of yourself as an opposition party in South Africa, the idea is that you've got to constantly find a way to criticize and say that this is not right, this is what he could have done, this is how he could have done it. For a moment in time, perhaps opposition parties could actually transport themselves into the president's shoes, into the ruling party shoes. Yes, we know government has failed. How many more times must we hear they failed? We know that they haven't really kept their finger on the pulse. I mean, just looking at what's going on with the matric marking issues and what's happening in the marking centers. I mean, they had 8 months, or if not longer, to get it right, and they didn't get it right. We know that, and I think trying to keep pushing it forward and emphasizing it doesn't really do much to show what is your role in playing an opposition party role. And I think part of the opposition party role is to say to the South African community, say to the South African public, you know what, we can actually find ways in which we can push forward as well in assisting towards that space. And I think we've come to a point where we recognize the follies of our system, of our governance, of our political landscape, of the ruling party. You mentioned corruption earlier. I just turn off every time I see corruption, because I'm thinking to myself, I know they stole the money. But the problem here is trying to actually develop the trust in our nation state, in our political body. I think we can no longer just gripe about things. We've got to start taking our own action, our own responsibility. And I think opposition parties in South Africa sometimes miss that cue, where the idea of opposition is to constantly criticize. Yes, there's going to be a State of the Nation address in February. Obviously, we'll have to see what the dynamics and the optics are going to be there. It's going to be maybe a virtual one. I'm not sure what the operational mechanics will be around that. But I think it'll be very importantly if what the opposition parties leaders did in the initial lockdown measures in March last year was to sign a code of conduct, to sign a code of agreement, to sign some kind of getting together and collectively engaging. And that would be really nice with the ruling party, because I don't think I certainly, for my sake, I don't think I want to listen to the whining and the griping and the constant complaining, because I think it doesn't really do much to say, how do we navigate ourselves collectively out of this space?
Thank you very much, Sanusha Naidu, political analyst from the Institute of Global Dialogue, speaking to